Hello, you're welcome to another episode of Diplomatic Affairs. My name is Harriet Nartey. My guest is a politician with over 40 years of experience in diplomacy and international relations, banking and marketing, corporate communications. Well, he's a true statesman who is well known on the political platform, but much is not known about him when it comes to his career as a diplomat. Our conversation today will provide us with in-depth analysis about his career as a diplomat and also take you back to the year 1994 to 1997 when he was appointed as Ghana's ambassador to Washington, D.C., the United States of America, under the regime of former President Jerry John Rawlings. Please stick and stay with us. I will be back right after this break.
Hello.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How are you?
By God's grace.
Thank you so much for making the time to join us on Diplomatic Affairs today.
Naturally.
Please.
Always a pleasure.
Welcome back. My guest is Ekow Spio-Garbrah. I believe the name rings a bell. Well, let's get straight to business. Welcome to Diplomatic Affairs.
Thank you so much. Sure.
How are you?
By God's grace, very, very well.
Let's talk about you. On the political stage, you are so well known. Everybody knows you as a politician. I was very thrilled to have learned that you had MA in International Relations. Let's talk a bit about your life, who you are, and your professional journey as well.
Well, yes, it's curious that because of the nature of politics and the fact that politics gives you a fairly large either national stage or international stage, as it may be, many people may have misconstrued my primary career as politics. But fortunately, by God's grace, I've been in politics, as I've explained to some people, sometimes less than 10 years, cumulatively. Mm-hmm. But because of the prominent positions, political positions that I've held, people tend to think all my life has been in politics. I'm nearly 70 years old, so if I say I've spent only about 10 years in politics, then you have to wonder where have I spent the rest of my life.
That's where I find myself.
So the truth, of course, is that I spent maybe the first 20 years of my life trying to get my education. And I went to Atwater Primary School. When I started with Banchataki Primary School, which is at Dabraka. So I don't want to ignore that. But I spent only a couple of years there. Then I went to Atwater Primary School, then Atwater Secondary School, and then to University of Ghana, Commonwealth Hall, and studied communication at the graduate level at the University of Ghana School of Communications, and then went to the United States where I also studied international affairs, which you just referred to, and liked it very much, obviously, and well, got a distinction in the subject, and then chose an international career at that point well, there's a story to that, how I managed to get, within a year of arriving in the United States, a job with the world's largest communications consultancy company at the time, Hill and Knowlton in New York City. Nice nice office on the 30th floor of a high-rise building.
With an amazing view.
With the view of New York, the UN, and all kinds of, skyscrapers. So here I was a young person, before 28 years old, in New York City with the top PR firm in the world, Hill and Knowlton. And there I was assigned to some very international clients. So I was in an international division, the first African to be hired in that company in its whole history. And at that time, there were already 1,000 professionals working in 33 countries, in 44 offices. In the United States alone, we had about 20 offices. So there were already some 44 offices of Hill and Knowlton around the world. So they were in Geneva, they were in Paris, they were also in Hong Kong, and quite a number of other cities. And in international division of Hill and Knowlton, we counseled clients from the multinational world. So amongst my clients at the time were the government of Indonesia, for which I wrote, incredibly enough, as a black man in New York City in the 1970s. I was the editor of Indonesia Development News, which was a newsletter that came out every quarter, which was translated into, well, it appeared in English, it was translated into French, German, and Japanese, and then distributed in 12 countries. 1970s, before internet, before, well, we started working on Wang computer at the time, but really before the computer in the real sense. It was possible in those days. How we did it, I don't know. Other clients included the government of Austria, for which I wrote the first Austrian primer on exports, how to export to the United States for Austrian companies. Here was a black guy sitting in New York telling Austrian exporters how they should export to the United States. I became Minister of Trade and Industry later. I don't know what the connection was, but that's another part of the puzzle. And Crédit Agricole, which was the largest bank in the world at the time, in the 1980s. It's a French agricultural bank, but they were opening an office in the USA, and they wanted us to help them with all their communications and publicity, etc. Then Rabobank, Netherlands, that was a Dutch company also operating globally, but also in the United States. UBAF, Arab American Bank, a Middle Eastern bank. Then, of course, OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, based in Vienna. So, interesting work for a young man, energetic, highly prolific, writing all kinds of things in those days, and impressing my mostly, white American Caucasian bosses. So I did that for about 6 years, and it was during that period that I believe I came to the attention of the World Bank and International Finance Corporation, because we're sending newsletters to them. So Development News talked about the oil industry, about rattan furniture, wood exports, all the things that Indonesia did. In those days, Indonesia was already, in those 70s, trying to establish a helicopter industry as a journey towards an aviation industry. And I think the minister at the time was B.J. Habibie, an Indonesian minister. We had Hartoto, and all kinds of interesting ministers who I met as part of the, Hill and Knowlton delegation. When they were coming, we arranged their visits to, not only to the United States, but to all these countries where Hill and Knowlton had offices. So we had investment missions and investment tours and trade fairs and trade expos, a lot of communication work. That was really my grounding in the business of communication globally. And during that time, well, as I said, among other things, I came to the attention of the World Bank Group, who invited me for an interview, and it looks as if I did well. So they said to me in 1986, that's when I went to the interview, that I had done well and I ought to be appointed very soon, so I should wait for a letter. I went back to New York City. The interview was in Washington, D.C. And the gentleman called me, Mr. Kirby Jones, my boss at the World Bank, called me and said, "Oh, Ekow, we had hoped for a budget for this position, but the budget wasn't approved. So sorry, just hold on and let's see what happens." 2 years later, they called me. This time, they made me go and see the executive vice president, who was the head of the whole IFC, equivalent to, well, the number 2 person in the World Bank Group. And he said, "Okay, we have a budget now. So are you ready to work with us, IFC?" I said, "Yes."
After 2 years of waiting.
Yeah, so William Larry. But by this time, I'd waited 10 years, the whole story. If you understand that I applied to work at the World Bank in 1978.
1978.
When I was waiting, when I was about to leave for the United States.
So 10 years.
I applied to work for the World Bank. Yes, everything takes time. So I'm used to waiting. 1978, I applied to work for the World Bank and applied to work for the African Development Bank.
Right.
So this application took place in Abidjan, which I went to visit. And that's when I realized that, oh, African Development Bank is here. Oh, wow, let me apply to them. And then, by the way, let me also apply to the World Bank. They have also an office in Abidjan. So I applied to these 2 very big organizations. I just left the letters to float around. And then did my own business, as I said, with Harriet Nartey and other companies. I also worked for Southwestern Bell after working for Harriet Nartey for 6 years or so. Southwestern Bell was the world's largest telephone directory publishing company and one of the Bell system companies in the United States. They were broken up from AT&T by a certain Judge Green in around 1982, and they became sister bells, as we called them. So I ended up working for NYNEX, that's the New York, New England Bell telephone company, and then Southwestern Bell, which is Southwestern United States telephone company, in the telephone directory business. I also became a salesman at the time and discovered that I had incredible sales talents. So out of 1,000 Southwestern Bell salespeople littered around the whole United States, I was consistently in the top 10. So it's surprising, not too surprising, that my son actually has also become a salesperson for Hilton Group in the United States. So maybe there's a little bit of that flows through us. So those were the early years. So that's after the International Finance Corporation, 3 years of International Finance Corporation, and I could have stayed there for 30, 40 years and had a fantastic retirement, as most of my former colleagues now are enjoying.
Why did you decide to come home?
I'd always been at heart an African, and I still has Africa flows very powerfully through my veins. So if you remember the office you came to, it's Africa House, and I found that even though we all claim to be Africans, not many people pay more than lip service to their Africanness. So when it came time for me to rent an office space, I found a building in Asylum Down, Accra, which I'm renting now, and I chose to brand it as Africa House, just to remind me and everyone else who comes there that we are primarily Africans. And all the other companies that I've established, I've generally tried to make them as African as possible. So I've formed the Africa Business Communication. There's been Africa Business Center for Developing Education. There was Africa Cancer Organization. There's a Pan-African Cable Systems Company. And then Africa Celebrity Fund, many other Africa-wide, Africanized type organizations that I've been associated with or have been privileged to found. But next would be the work at the African Development Bank in Abidjan. So the opportunity to come back to Africa was really what really kept me going. My parents, of course, were aging, and being in Africa at some point in time was also a good thing for me to stay with my family and nurse my aging mother and things like that. But African Development Bank, Abidjan, was an incredible experience, which I'm sure your audience will like to know more about. Then Ghana government came along, ambassador to the United States, which was a highlight of my career in a certain sense. I was only 40 years old when President Rawlings decided that as young as I was, I could be an ambassador. And do you know what happened? The privilege, I don't know whether many people have had this opportunity. I was actually asked by President Rawlings that he has a diplomatic appointment to offer me, because I then, through domestic political, somebody who get chicanery, not succeeded in becoming Minister of Information, which was the original position he wanted to offer me. But to become ambassador Ghana's ambassador anywhere, he offered me this incredible choice of choose between the United Kingdom and the United States. Which of these two countries would you like to be ambassador to?
Interesting.
I don't know how many people have had that opportunity to choose their own ambassadorial appointment and to the top 2 possible destinations in the whole world. 40 years old. And I said, wow, I think United States is where I've lived and I've worked, and I know a little bit more about it.
Familiar with it.
I'm more familiar with it, and I know I can do a good job. But United Kingdom, I've traveled there a few times. But
contacts built
it's kind of a small
US
country for me.
Right.
So let me go where I could really maximize my potential. So to the United States I went, and surprisingly, within the first 3 months, I got an invitation for President Rawlings to visit the United States. He was completely shocked. Didn't expect that at all, because for all the, I guess, 14, 15 years, or what the number, no, 13 years before that, from 1981 to 1994, this was the period,
right.
12 years, he had not, to my knowledge...
That was the 8-city tour, is that right?
Yeah, that eventually, not that visit, not the first one, but eventually it was an 8-city tour. But the first visit was a visit just to Washington, D.C., to say hello to President Clinton, who had just been elected President of the United States.
And you said that was the first time the President Rawlings had traveled to the United States of America.
To my knowledge and to the knowledge of all the reports. Well, he would have been the best person to answer that question. And of course, his lovely wife, Nana Kunidu, is still alive to answer that or other related questions whenever you wish to
Right.
interview her. But my judgment, my understanding of the politics of Ghana at the time was that he himself, President Rawlings himself, was not very warm to the idea of the Western world. So if you know the history of Ghana well enough, around the 1980s, Ghana began with a coup d'etat, where a revolution which brought President Rawlings to power after 1979, 1981. And his friends at the time, people who he looked up to, who he enjoyed being with, were Castro of Cuba, Gaddafi of Libya, Sandinistas, Nicaragua, and some left of center such people. So those were the people that the PNDC initially wanted to have better relationships with. But the history books tell us that after many delegations have been sent to Eastern Europe and to North Korea and such places, Castro, it was like, hey, we don't give money to countries, we have solidarity, we work with you, but we can give you human beings. Castro can give us doctors and nurses and so forth, but cash, no.
We don't have it.
Development will come from yourself, so go ahead and develop yourself. I wasn't part of the delegation, but that's how I understood things went. And so after running around a number of years and trying with the economic recovery program, of course, others would have said, oh, but yes, you are struggling now, but don't you know you are also a member of the United Nations, a member of the World Bank Group, member of the African Development Bank. So don't you go to those places and see what they can do for you? So, of course, the World Bank eventually came and helped Ghana with the economic recovery programs of the 1980s with Dr. Kwesi Botwe as finance minister, etc. And by the time I got to Washington in 1994, the history books suggested that ever since Nkrumah himself came to the United States, because he himself has studied in the United States, no Ghanaian president had been to the United States, because after that, Nkrumah's overthrow, there were military governments. So you don't expect Ankara or FIFA to come to the United States. Then Achampon also came. You wouldn't expect Achampon to come to the United States. But Buzia was a prime minister, and I think he came to the United States while he was prime minister, but not a president. So in terms of presidential politics, and then we had other, Rawlings was then the next possible leader, head of state, who could have come to Washington. But for whatever reason, I wasn't here. My sense was that they turned to the east, and things were not working, they turned to the west.
Right.
But they were still very wary, even of the west at the time. And of course, the propaganda in the United States was also very much anti-Rawlings. The Ghanaian community there had given the impression that Rawlings cannot come to the United States. He's debarred from coming here. They don't like him here and all that. So when I went there, I sensed around, smelt around, talked to a few of my friends and colleagues, and I said, oh, this is not true. I mean, okay, so, and of course, Nana Akufo-Addo and President Rawlings themselves were, I'm sure, reflecting on the merits of having some relationships with the United States. And the first thing was for Madam Rawlings to be invited by the African American Institute and some other agencies to come on a study tour of just 1 month. So she stayed in Baltimore, Maryland, and had a tour of a number of states and cities. And she was amazed at the warmth with which I organized Ghanaians to greet her, right from the airport, Baltimore International Airport, all the way to
Great
Washington, D.C.
reception.
Incredible reception. So, I mean, what are we hearing? I mean, all this propaganda about Rawlings is not welcome in the United States. And look at Ghanaians coming in their large numbers to welcome them. No, this thing cannot be true. So I'm sure she sent back a report that indicated that a lot of green light was awaiting them. So August, I get this invitation for Rawlings, President Rawlings, 3 months after I became ambassador.
I was coming to
Shocked,
that.
couldn't believe it. Said, no, speaking to me in Ghana, no, tell them that I have some other engagements and we'll find another time for it. Well, okay, so I give White House
You
negative
made this
reaction.
happen your first 3 months
Yes,
in
I did.
office as Ghana's
Yes.
ambassador to the United States of America.
But I'll give credit to a certain ambassador who succeeded me, Ambassador Kumsen, because he, and I didn't know this before, but he had lived in Arkansas, which is President Clinton's hometown, where he became governor of Arkansas and then later president of the United States. And incredibly enough, it turned out that Ambassador Kumsen's first wife was a nurse who apparently had delivered a Zanato Rawlings Madam Rawlings's daughter here at 37 Hospital.
Interesting.
That is the story ahead. And that same nurse, who then moved to the United States, ended up delivering Chelsea Clinton as a baby.
Oh.
So here were two heads of state's wives, or two first ladies whose children had been delivered by the same nurse.
Yes.
So that was the connection. And so Mr. Kumsin and I got to know each other. I created an organization called Ghana Development Fund. He was in California at the time. I made him president of the Ghana Development Fund so that he could also exercise some leadership in the Ghanaian community. And eventually when I left Washington altogether, based on whatever relationships he had built with the Rawlingses, they chose to appoint him as ambassador. Some people were at the time trying to get me to, as we took his appointment. I said, no, I don't do things like that.
Politics.
If President Rawlings has found him suitable to be my successor, sure, why not? I'm not going to oppose it. So he did well in at least introducing me to some White House secretaries. People think that the secretary is not an important person, but those are people who move things in many organizations. So I ended up being invited by those secretaries to a barbecue within my first month or two in Washington, dressed casually at a barbecue which President Clinton attended. The only black person in that
Was you?
barbecue, yes. There were about 50 other people, very small private barbecue. Now, so I'm giving the credit for that to Ambassador Kumsin, because I didn't know these Arkansas ladies, but he arranged for me to be invited to that event, which Clinton arrived at. So when Clinton arrived, then we met and we had a very nice and warm chat. It was an open door at that time to almost anything that I wanted to do, as far as the United States was concerned. And so when President Rawlings then decided to come in March 9th, 1995, for his first official visit, fantastic. I mean, it was like a heroic event that the Ghanaians had been waiting for 15, 30 years. It was 30 years since a Ghanaian head of state had been in the United States. So it was a huge event, even though it was just limited to Washington, D.C. and the Blair House, which is the official residence for guests of the White House. So there's a one-day visit to Blair House and Washington. And I organized then a dinner in the Mayflower Hotel, also a groundbreaking dinner for President Clinton in collaboration with the Corporate Council on Africa. Corporate Council on Africa was then a very small organization of some 6 companies that were trying to establish a footage in Africa. And I took them from 6 companies to 22 by simply insisting that anybody who wanted to sponsor that dinner in the Mayflower Hotel had to join the Corporate Council on Africa first. And that immediately gave them another
That was strategic. 16
members. But there was a certain transaction that I expected the Ghana embassy to benefit from financially, but which the Corporate Council colleagues reneged. But that it wasn't a written agreement, so it was a gentleman's agreement that I'll help you this way if you also help the embassy that way. They didn't want to do their part of the bargain. Nevertheless, the visit went very well. So next time is when in October that year, in September, October each year, the United Nations holds its annual General Assembly, and heads of state routinely are invited. So you can imagine President Rawlings would have been invited in every previous year before 1995 to the United Nations, just as every other head of state is invited. And you would have sent Mr. D.F. Annan, you would have sent Mr. P.V. Obeng, you would have sent the ambassador to the United Nations. He had never gone to the United Nations himself.
Was it that the invitations came and he declined?
I'm sure he declined, yeah. Because I'm saying he didn't...
Or they never came at all?
No, he had not even attempted or lobbied to be invited to the White House, which most African heads of state take as a religious duty. As soon as you're invited, you must go. As soon as you become head of state, you're sworn in. The next week, you're looking for your invitations to the White House, to Buckingham Palace, and so on. So, I mean, there's the African head of state mindset, but Rawlings did not have that mindset. He was building Ghana. He was carrying cocoa on his back. He was, cleaning gutters in Nima. Some of us had to do that as well as ministers. So he had a different mindset as to what a leader should do, because it takes diplomatic relations with the IMF for Ghana to be attempting to utilize its IMF agreement to go and get a $3 billion loan. It's not just banking. It's not just finance. It's also diplomacy.
A lot of diplomacy.
So the ambassador to the United States actually, as I was.
Right.
It's also a signatory to World Bank loans if it's required. So whenever the Minister of Finance does not want to travel to World Bank to assign a World Bank loan or agreement, the ambassador to the United States, I signed those loans. So by signing those loans, which fortunately in Rawlins's era went to developmental projects, I was fortunate to study international finance and banking at New York University after studying at international affairs at Ohio University, and then practicing in various fields, both diplomacy and the banking side, with the African Development Bank, with the World Bank, and before that, even in between with the City Federal Savings Bank, the mortgage side of my banking career.
We will talk about a few of the interventions during your tenure as Ghana's ambassador to the United States,
Very
Washington, D.C., the United States. Would you say your background as a banker, corporate communications, your exposure to the international business space also contributed to the success, if I can put it that way,
Absolutely.
of your career in office or your appointment in office as Ghana's ambassador to the U.S.?
I believe so. I mean, of course, President Rawlings would have had to see something in me beyond what I must have seen for him to have appointed me at that age to be ambassador to the United States. And I'm pleased to say that he was right, in the sense that if you ask the Americans, because the best way to test whether a decision is right is not so much the Ghanaian community, which also could attest to it, in terms of how I changed perceptions of Ghana in the United States, and how I developed wider and broader, deeper relationships between Ghana and various U.S. entities, all the way from the Congress itself, where I had established fantastic relationship with a number of senators and congressmen, for which when President Rawlings was coming, again in 1995, October, the famous 8 cities, 10 days visit, which I hope is still a record in the foreign ministry. And if I can shorten the part of how it happened.
Right.
President Rawlings was coming to the United Nations, as I said, and most ambassadors to the United States during that period will probably keep quiet and allow their colleague ambassador to the United Nations to lead and allow President Rawlings to do whatever he had to do. But I had a certain view and maybe a vision that we can take advantage of President Rawlings' visit to the United Nations in New York to show him a little bit more of the United States, since he had only come for one day in March earlier in the year. So I applied to the foreign ministry. Dr. Obed Asamoah was my boss, the foreign minister, and I'm sure he can attest to it, that I'd like President Rawlings to visit a few cities in the United States, but I'd like them to approve a small budget for it. And I got a response that, well, this is right around September, and we are looking for something that will happen in October. And so the budget I was looking for should have been in the budget request the previous year, in October, November. So it's now too late.
The timing was so too short for
But awkward, but so what can we do? So I thought to myself for a minute, I'm sure I said a prayer or two, and then I called President Rawlings myself, and I told him, Mr. President, I know you're coming to New York for the UN General Assembly, but I'm also thinking that you can take advantage to see a couple of other states, the United States. What do you think about that? I said, I said, but President Rawlings, I'm trying to get you to see a few more states. So let me develop a program and share with you. So before I knew, because I eventually thought of how to brand the program, and I said, well, he's coming here to the United States, and I have to take him to a number of cities. So I eventually said, look, I can take you to 8 cities, 8 world capitals.
8 world capitals. All in the United States.
All United States in less than 10 days. So, what do you mean? What do you mean? How are you going to do that? I said, well, you know that New York is the financial capital of the world. We have to go to New York anyway. That's where the UN is. So you'll be there. And we can let you see the Wall Street and the financial sector, which is outside the jurisdiction of the UN ambassador. Ghana's ambassador to the UN is in New York, but dealing with the financial community is part of the US ambassador to the United States' responsibility. And after that, I said, I didn't talk about Lincoln University then, but eventually Lincoln University came up as part of the program. we'll go back to Washington, where is the political capital of the world. And we've been there already in
that is
March.
Washington, D.C.
So Washington, D.C.
Political capital of the world.
I said, okay, so what next? I said, well, I think you need to see the African American capital of the world. That's where, Martin Luther King is buried in Atlanta. His wife, Coretta Scott King, was still there. Maya Angelou, the poet, and Andrew Young, Ambassador Young, and others. Very glitterati of African American society. Atlanta is their home. Oh, wow. That's the African American capital of the world. Okay. So next capital, which one? I said, well, I think you should go to Houston. That's the energy capital of the world, where petroleum companies and oil companies are all headquartered, and, and President Bush was also then resident in Texas. And so we'll probably find a way to call on him. So, yeah, okay. What else? I said, well, we should see Chicago. And Chicago is the commodities trading capital of the world. And what is that trading? I said, well, that's where they trade pork bellies and cocoa beans and coffee beans and every other commodity. Wheat and barley and all that. Oh, wow. Chicago, yeah. And then the next capital, well, I think you should go to Detroit. Detroit is the automobile manufacturing capital of the world. Hey, Ekow, what are you talking about? We don't call. Well, Mr. President, the last Kadue is Hollywood, California, Beverly Hills. Hey, why Hollywood? Mr. President, why Hollywood? Hey, Hollywood. Yeah. I'd like to introduce you to some of your old-time school, I guess, dream stars, like Aretha Franklin and Dana Ross, and in those days, Michael Jackson was still alive.
The icons.
Whitney Houston, the icons, And they were there, MC Hammer. I mean, of course, Stevie Wonder, he knew already, and Stevie Wonder had already come. In fact, that was my first diplomatic assignment. I haven't said that. When I arrived in Washington, the first day I arrived in Washington, I took my bags straight to California. Because President Rawlings told me to go and arrange for Dionne Warwick and Whitney and Stevie Wonder, who were co-hosts or co-patrons of the then PANAFEST, Pan-African Festival of Arts, to meet and to plan and do things. They're not meeting. One felt I'm older than you, the other felt I'm more popular than you. So they're not meeting, and things were not going well with the PANAFEST of 1994. So he said, please go to California and solve that problem. Right. So I actually traveled that same day with Mr. Dake, who was then he had a title with the Ghana Cultural Community. And so he and I went to California to meet with Stevie Wonder, but surprisingly, Stevie Wonder gave us an appointment for 1 a.m. I said, President,
1 a.m.
1 a.m. appointment with the ambassador of Ghana to the United States. When I asked his colleagues, how can you give me such an awkward time? I said, Mr. Ambassador, Brother Stevie is, does not have the capacity of sight. Oh. And so he trains and rehearses at midnight. That's when he does most of his rehearsals, when the sun is down, and
that's the time he functions
the most. So he functions at that time, and then the daytime he tends to sleep. So that's the best time we can get for you. Appointment with Stevie Wonder at 1 a.m. So diplomacy has a lot of, interesting dimensions to it.
Hold on. Diplomacy has a lot of interesting twists, and it is associated with so many things, especially whom you know and the connections. I'm going to take a break. When we come back, we are still having a very interesting conversation with former Ghana's ambassador to Washington, D.C., the United States of America. And of course, we'll be talking about his ministerial portfolios as well, and the significance of the role the diplomats play in building our economy. I'll be back after this break.
Hello, information.
Madam,
Me, I have still not got the money for that list of expensive building materials you sent to me.
the price of the iron rods have been increased.
Too much, are they?
Madam, relax. Look, that's not why I didn't call you. I just visited IPCP. where the engineers told me everything about Trasacco fast floor.
Trawanko, please, those people are expensive. Are they not the people building those big houses in town? I beg going to guys.
Madam, in fact, I used to think the same until I visited their office today and they gave me an estimate of how much it will cost. Yomo, the estimate is free. It's cheaper than the one I even sent you.
Wow.
Building contractors, foremen, masons. Visit IPCP, the Trasacco Fast Floor. Engineers will assist you build an affordable, faster and stronger building.
Oh, madam. It is done.
Wow.
Trasacco Fast Floor. Stronger, faster and affordable.
This is a Trasacco construction product.
Welcome back. The show is still Diplomatic Affairs with me, Harriet Nartey, and my guest is Ekow Spio-Garbrah. The name rings a bell, right? He's well known in Ghana's political space, but she didn't really know more about him when it comes to his diplomatic assignments and, of course, his relations with the international community. And so we've been sitting here talking about his years of serving and representing Ghana in the United States of America, serving under the former president of Ghana, His Excellency Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. So we've discussed the 8-city tour, and the famous 8-city tour, where he organized for Rawlings together with other officers to visit the United States of America and explore the U.S. I am very much interested in the dividends of the interventions introduced by you. Let's talk about the impact of the 8-city tour.
Well, I think first of all, you have to put yourself in the position of an average African American or even an average American who knows very little about the rest of the world usually, and often knows very even worse about Africa in particular, and what he knows is not positive. Even now, maybe a little more positive because Wakanda and things have helped to change public opinion. But in those days, we're still supposed to be, wild animals jumping from trees,
on the trees and
jumping around, etc. So if you want to change the minds of African Americans, you really have to penetrate them with the best foot forward. And having an African leader of the charismatic stature of President Rawlings coming to the United States and mixing with the glitterati of the USA, with the leadership. You start with the White House, you do the United Nations. That's why I told you about this 8-city tour, take him to, areas that have historical reverence among especially the African American community. So the tomb of Martin Luther King and visit to Madam Coretta Scott King and Andrew Young, Maya Angelou. Those things, hit a very raw but positive nerve with the African Americans. Make sure they are in Essence magazine, they are in Jet magazine in those days, they are in Ebony magazine. They are in Black Enterprise magazine. I made sure they were in all those particular magazines because their editors were invited to functions, and we arranged and granted numerous interviews for them, and especially when it came to celebrity time.
Did that somehow change the perception? How Ghana was perceived?
Of course, that's what I'm saying.
In the United States, that changed the narrative somehow, right?
By all means, because I'm saying Africans as a whole, most Americans can't tell you where Ghana is on a map. Just as most Ghanaians can't tell where
you should see my promo,
Arkansas
my new promo.
or where Milwaukee is on an American map. So that's understandable. But nevertheless, you have to talk about Africa. Africa is a big continent. Ghana is a small one. So the maps, we're showing maps of where Ghana is and what our natural resources. So we took, the Embassy of Ghana itself, took this to be a powerful opportunity to exhibit and open up what Ghana is to our audiences. We didn't just sit down and say, we want the president to sit around. We accompanied it with a whole lot of literature and materials and brochures and magazines that told the picture of Ghana. So the Ghana Tourist Board, the Ghana Export Promotion Agency,
all the stakeholders were on board.
Were either members of the delegation or they came with literature that we could share to the audiences that we were meeting. Remember, I had been trained in the world's largest public relations firm, Harriet Nartey. So if I was working for Indonesia and I could do things for Sweden, Svenska Cellulosa Aktiebolaget, one of my clients, a Swedish wood, forestry industry company, the Austrian Trade Commission. Why wouldn't I do the same for my own country? So I was very prepared, very ready, very, I'd acquired the necessary skill sets.
Right.
I knew all the punch. I mean, look, Ghana, this 8-city trip, 10 days to 8 cities, was not funded by the government of Ghana. The government only funded President Rawlings's plane, which traveled with him to the different destinations. I had to find funding.
Right.
So that's enough fundraising skill.
How were you able to raise money for this?
In 1 month, I had to find funding for the entire trip, including the 15 to 20, officials who were not part of the delegation, who were also traveling with him, and who would go with him to Atlanta and expect to be in a hotel, go with him to Houston, expect to be in a hotel, expect to have vehicles. It's a complex thing, but this is another organizational ability by God's grace that I've been blessed with, but which I also sharpened at Harriet Nartey, because it's all event management, event planning. It's all part of the communication skill sets that in the United States they don't joke at all with, because almost every event has to be staged, has to be planned, has to be organized, has to be invitation cards.
As you talk about organizational ability, before I forget that, how critical is that to an ambassador's role?
Well, it depends on which country you've been sent to, and it depends on what your country expects you to achieve in that country. So if you are sent to Namibia as an ambassador, it may mean one thing different from if you are sent to Finland or Helsinki. So the Ghana Foreign Ministry itself, I'm sorry to say, doesn't do a good job beyond giving you a general orientation of really shepherding any ambassador through the many myriad scenarios that one can face. And so Ambassador Deborah, who preceded me in Washington, was famous to have been giving seminars and workshops to young diplomats, especially in the countries that gained their independence after Ghana. So they didn't really have a strong diplomatic service. But even now, one of the things I need to emphasize is that Ghana itself does not make as good use of its former diplomats, and who are still usually alive, well, and healthy, even when they have left office, and where the knowledge they've acquired of many countries in the world can be put to the use of the country in many ways. And of course, we also don't maximize the potential of even our diaspora in terms of the Ghanaians living overseas. Even though
this is why we have the Diaspora Affairs Office set up now, right? It's
set up all right, but whether what they are doing really touches the average Ghanaian is better than ever, I'm sure.
Right.
Because I know we have the Afro Nation, Afro Chilla, Afro this, and all these touristic types that are coming on, which are all in the right direction.
Yes.
But of course, at the end of the day, you must touch the money. You can touch African Americans and other people who come to visit, but how to get millions, billions to be following that track is a challenge. And I'm sure somebody is doing, I hope, a good job of it. I'm just saying that as a country, there's so much more we can do that we don't really do as well. So we pick up from the latter part of the 8-day visit, 10-day visit,
10-day visit,
8 cities, 10 days. And if you now see President Rawlings at a Beverly Hilton hotel, and Michael Jackson has been invited to present a sword to him. So Michael Jackson comes in for just a cameo 10-minute appearance, presents that sword, and gets out. And I have to choreograph all these things behind the scene. I mean, so the Ghanaian delegation is sitting there. They don't know how I'm choreographing this and how these people appear on the scene. How Aretha Franklin comes there and Whitney Houston. And I made President Rawlings and Nana Akufo-Addo, his wife, take photographs with all the 20 or 30 heavy hitters in American music, and including, we go to the 25th anniversary of the Soul Train Awards. I'm sure you've seen the Soul Train with the dancers in the middle.
One of the biggest.
Don Collinius, the guy who chaperoned the whole Soul Train, he was celebrating his 25th anniversary just on the day that we arrived in Beverly Hills. We didn't plan it, but we managed to get invitations to only President Rawlings and Madam Akufo-Addo and myself, front row seats, saw the whole performance, and took photographs with all the glitterati afterwards. You know, so these are, I'm sure, part of Madam Rawlings's, artifacts, the things that she's gathered. But beyond that, there was then what the foreign ministry itself saw as how to build upon that. So I hope Ambassador Kumsin, who succeeded me, and other ambassadors have also played their roles.
You were in the U.S., serving as Ghana's ambassador for 3 years, is that right? 1994 to 1997.
Yes.
If I have to measure your accomplishments in quantity, like what you were able to achieve.
How much gold were we able to export? How much cocoa did we export? How many chocolates
I want to talk about
Americans to eat?
During that 3 years as Ghana's ambassador to the United States. How much were we able to get in terms of, things that we can really speak to, like, okay, employment in this area, we had investors coming in, cocoa, gold, like you rightly mentioned.
Well, I mean, I wish we measured all our embassies and all our civil servants using those metrics. I don't have any problem with that at all. And by whatever measure you use, I would have excelled anyway, because I have a spirit of excellence and I aspire to excellence, and I'm willing to work hard to achieve excellence. And that starts from the classroom into the workplace and in whatever I've done. But there are no such metrics that I'm aware of. So all I can say is that if you give somebody the task of organizing a visit for his head of state with no budget, and he's able to execute it, take you to Atlanta in the best hotels in America at no cost to the state. Now, people are killing the government's budget these days. But in my time, we're actually, mobilizing resources from outside the budget for the benefit of Ghana, for its president, head of state, a Ghana delegation, and they made impact. And I'm mentioning the names. I mean,
but Ghana had its own challenges during that era.
It had what, please?
Its own challenges.
Oh, yeah, Ghana will always have challenges. But I'm saying the challenges were not Ebola, they were not, COVID, they were not debt, stress or bankruptcy proceedings as we have now. There were normal health problems, road accidents, etc. And in the midst of all of that, we were hitting hard. We got to the United States. First of all, getting to the White House Oval Office for a president, that itself is, if you did that, nothing but that, is a major achievement. Then if you go beyond that to hit the major, nerve centers of America, you have to know about the Brookings Institute, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and Carnegie Endowment. These are places that the think tanks of America, dwell. And you have programs that you make sure they're invited to events. I just didn't have invitations for 300, 400. Every single event that was organized was oversubscribed. There were Ghanaians standing outside, a ballroom for 500, a ballroom for 1,000, and there were no seats left. Oversubscribed because of the salesmanship I brought to it. I tell you, I'd already been a salesman in the United States.
Right. So you brought your expertise.
I brought my expertise, which the government would not even know about, to do the work. And that's why I could raise the funds. Raising funds also requires salesmanship. If I call the governor of the state of Illinois, which is where Chicago is, I tell him, Mr. Governor, my president is coming to visit your state in 1 week or 2 weeks' time, and I'd like you to host a dinner or a lunch for him. For 500 of your leading businessmen and women, can I have your approval for such an event, Mr. Governor? And he says, oh yeah, that sounds very good. That sounds interesting. Yeah, why not? That has saved the government of Ghana the cost of the whole banquet. But we make, in the Chambers of Commerce of the United States, charge their members. Chamber of Commerce of Atlanta. My president is coming to Atlanta next 2 weeks' time, and I would like you to host a breakfast for your Chambers of Commerce in Atlanta. Your members will pay to attend the event. Ghanaians will come for free. 500 people, top ballroom, breakfast between 8 and 10. How does that sound to you, Mr. Mayor? That sounds good. That sounds doable. Can you do it in 2 weeks? I'm now tasking the mayor to do it for Ghana, which nobody has ever asked him to do. But they have given him an opportunity because he now sees his own image, his own reputation will fly, because New York Times will be coming, Wall Street Journal will be there, And CNN is in Atlanta already. And I know all these guys. And I'm telling him how the program will benefit him. Oh, yeah, I can see that. That's a good idea. And I do that to 8 governors of the United States. And at least 8 mayors of the cities that I'm talking about. And they all line up and they agree. And I talk to all the Ghanaian Association presidents, because I also have organized, Ghanaians to be, who were not organized before in most of these places, to have their own Ghanaian associations in these cities to welcome Rawlings. Because if Rawlings is coming, then let's organize ourselves. Because it was NDC and NPP anyway. That's another side of the discussion. So we got them organized. And they are benefiting from these organizations till now. So these Afro-Chela and Afro-Nation and all that are probably benefiting 20 years later from these initial seeds that we sowed.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've mentioned in passing the traits, the necessary traits when it comes to ambassadors or high commissioners. I would want to find out from you how important is the role of an ambassador to the development of his or her country?
It's really down to the ambassador's personal competency and his or her personal courage and potential aggressiveness in championing any number of causes. Because when you are given that ambassadorial position, as I experienced it, I mean, especially for the political ambassadors, you distinguish between career ambassadors and the political ambassadors. So I was a political ambassador, and so I was only going to serve for a certain period. Then when my party is not in office, I move. The career diplomats will stay and keep moving from country to country. And so you have a term limit because of politics. You may not know how long your party will be in office. And so there's a time to deliver the outputs. But it really boils down to your personal attributes, your personal willingness to work hard, because your supervision is very weak or non-existent. If you are ambassador of Ghana to South Korea, nobody will see you for a whole year. In some cases, unless Ghanaian businessmen are coming there, 1 or 2 government delegations might come there for a certain conference on this or that. But by and large, you have very little supervision. And so you can just go and play tennis, which also is available, or play golf, or while away your time reading newspapers and magazines. And some do that in some embassies. And so there's a certain amount of laziness in the diplomatic service, and some just wait for the cocktail hour, because almost every evening there is a drinking opportunity, whether to just eat some cocktails or get drunk, if that's what you wish. So those can be distractions if you're not really focused. But I was producing a newsletter for the Ghanaian community from the Ghana embassy, which wasn't existing before. I produced it, Ghana News or something. Then I produced a business newsletter also for the American business community, Ghana, I think quarterly, and I was also granting a whole lot of interviews, as we are doing now, to anybody who was interested in listening about Ghana. And I was visiting particular states and mingling with, important people who can make a difference. So CMS Energy, for example, you are interested in tangible results, came to Ghana partly out of my efforts in attracting a heavy-duty energy-related company. And Chevron also came about the same time, both to Ghana and to Nigeria, where they are exploring the Escravos gas fields. And of course, Exxon has come to Ghana recently, and we're back and forth, based on a cumulative effort of many other ambassadors. So it's difficult to just take credit by yourself, even with your staff, as the one who did this and the one who did that. It's a cumulative thing, and all of us help to build the reputation of the country. But there are those who also go to various countries to sleep as ambassadors. There's no question about that. They are sleeping ambassadors. So if Rawlings actually complained at one time, because there's an ambassador who was photographed sleeping. And Rawlings saw the photograph and said, in another speech he delivered somewhere, I want to warn you, those sleeping ambassadors. So, well, that's an incident that took place. But it took hard work, and I was young and agile as I am now, and still able to, perform one or two things. So I thank God that I was given that opportunity and I didn't mess up. There are places you go into the United States now. If you are interested, I'll give you a few numbers to call. And they'll tell you that the people we remember as ambassadors to the United States are Ambassador Deborah and Ambassador Garbrah. And I don't know whether because our names rhyme. And that's not a commentary on any other good ambassadors who have been to the United States, but it's a function of how did you push out of yourself and make a name for Ghana using your skill sets and whatever, your knowledge base. And by the time I got to the United States, I'd already worked for the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group.
Right.
I'd already worked for the African Development Bank, before becoming ambassador to the United States. I already worked for Hill & Knowlton. I'd already worked for Southwestern Bell.
Yeah, so you had the exposure, the experiences,
numerous skill sets and numerous
skill sets
things to draw from.
All of that. I want to ask, as a former trade and industry minister, we have the African Continental Free Trade Area in operationalization.
Built on a property that I had the honor of seeing to construction from ground floor to the 12th floor. Even though the contract was signed by my predecessor, Honorable Harriet Nartey.
Right.
And it was during my era that the entire Africa House, not Africa Export House, this is Africa Export House. My little office is Africa House. That's when the Exim Bank, Ghana Exim Bank and the Ghana Export Promotion, they are all in that building when that was built. So I take some
credit.
I'll share some pride and credit.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I want to find out from you, African Continental Free Trade Area
Secretariat,
for Africans.
Yes.
One big market.
Correct.
For the entire African continent.
Yes.
As a former trade and industry minister, how can we leverage this pact to build the Africa we want, even for Ghanaians to take ownership of this business?
It's a lot of work for which I've been prepared and ready. I've offered my services to the Continental Free Trade Secretariat and to anybody who wants to listen. Because I was also there at the birth. Remember that this was an idea that it was President Mills who actually moved in a motion in one of the AU, African Union meetings for Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat to be established. I think this current president who proposed that Ghana could host it.
Yeah.
But in between, when President Mahama was president, and as Minister of Trade and Industry, I also accompanied him to AU on a couple of occasions where I eventually ended up chairing meetings of the high-level committee that he was chairman of. President Mahama was. But when you go to AU, they're having their summits, every few minutes they pull the heads of state into a security session. So security tends to be their focus. And other issues of trade and climate change and so forth are also important, but others have to handle it. So I also had that opportunity to help to push that ball along in that committee. And subsequently, I also helped the establishment of the Africa Business Council, which is an agency under the African Union. When one night in Addis Ababa, business people were seated together and having drinks and complaining that this and that and that and all the things that were going wrong. But I told them, this is an opportunity for you as the business community to, jumpstart the process and write some documents that nobody wanted to write. Nobody wanted to write the paper that was needed for the next day's meeting. So I offered my services voluntarily, and I stayed up till about 4 a.m. putting together a couple of proposals and documents for them. When they woke up in the morning, I'd circulated it to all the appropriate officers. They were very surprised, impressed. And out of that came the Africa Business Council, which is headquartered in Addis, but has an Egyptian, president at this time. But your point was, how can Africans take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area? And ownership. It takes, so there are the legal aspects of it, there are the political aspects of it, there are the cultural aspects of it, the communication dimension to it, then also the actual nuts and bolts of buying and selling timber and cocoa and products. So, but to do that, properly speaking, or respectfully, a Ghanaian needs to know that if these are the natural resources of Ghana, and where in Africa can I export any of these natural resources? If somebody doesn't tell you that, or you don't have time to do your own research, and somebody also has to hold your hand to show you how to operate in the Kenyan market. It's an African market, all right, but it's very different. They use Swahili and other things to do their business there. They don't speak Twi. If you are in Damongo or you are in any Western region,
right,
and you want to export to, Namibia or to Lesotho, you have to have an idea of where that country is, what did they do, and why did they do that. So the Ghana Export Promotion Council, which was under my ministry, has a lot of work to do on a public education side in mobilizing Ghanaian business people to go here or there, and in chaperoning them through trade shows, trade fairs, export missions, and all of that, to gain more knowledge, to acquire understanding of the opportunities. They have to share to the Ghanaian public opportunities, conferences that are coming up in particular regions of the world, in Morocco, Marrakesh, etc., and what the subject matter is. Is it about digitalization? Is it about computer assembly? Is it about, exports of fruits and vegetables? It's a big subject. But if we organize ourselves well, and we use the knowledge, as I've said, of the foreign service officials who tend to be left alone to die because they are foreign service officers, and that's the professionals. They have served Ghana for 30, 40 years. They are retirement age. They are getting pension. So some of them just relax, or else they go and demonstrate about the haircuts and death bondholders. Okay, but unfortunately for me, I was a rolling stone which gathered no moss. So even though I worked in all these organizations, I didn't stay there long enough to get a pension. So I have to work, and that's why I keep working. And like many others who can afford to retire, I can't afford to retire.
You can't afford
to retire.
Right.
I have to work. And I'm pleased that even my seniors, like Mr. Kofi Annan, who also retired from the United Nations, chose to still work at various, things. He had his own foundation. And he was helping the East Africans, the Kenyans, to come out of potential conflict. So there's a lot of potential work, even for retired diplomats, if they wish to continue to be engaged. And I'm so engaged with my own Africa Business Center for Development Education, which is an NGO where we mentor young people to help them with their career choices and give them internships and scholarships, etc. And Africa Business Communication, where we offer professional communication counseling and consulting to all kinds of companies, multinational, small companies, big companies, to know their way around, both in Africa and globally. So opportunities exist, and Ghanaians can mobilize themselves because the Continental Free Trade is here, but Ghana will not get out of its debt by itself. We must plan an exit strategy out of the debt. And some of us have different comments on what the Ministry of Finance is currently doing, and if they want us to offer some of our suggestions, I have some of my ideas in writing. So I'm circulating it within a certain group. And hopefully before the middle of this year, we'll hear more about what I know and what I think can be done on the issue of Ghana's debt strategy.
You've spoken like a true diplomat, but we'll take it in good faith.
And not a politician occasionally.
I like you better in your diplomatic gown, I think, than the political
you
gown.
went and did a political question. I didn't think it to be part of this.
Well, the people must know. So we are here to serve the people.
Very good.
Thank you so much for your
it's
time.
A pleasure.
We really appreciate your time on this platform. Thank you
you
so much. We'll be coming back again, and I'm sure we also need some, professional guidance and counseling. So we hope to pass by your office very soon. Right. Well, thank you so much to you also for watching. This has been another interesting episode of Diplomats Diplomatic Affairs. Remember, we are in 46 African countries with a global audience via social media, and it's on Pan-African television every Saturday. So you can always catch up with us and get to know the diplomats, the diplomatic approaches to issues, what is happening in the country beyond our borders, the African continent, and of course the rest of the world. My guest has been the Honorable, once an ambassador is always an ambassador, Ambassador Ekow Spio-Garbrah, former Ghana's ambassador to the United States of America, Washington, D.C., and of course you know him also as the Trade and Industry Minister under John Mahama's presidency. So it's been a privilege having you on our show. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you same time next week. Enjoy the rest of our programs.
Truly African.
Hello and welcome to Street Talk on Pan-African Television. March is a very important month and this week is very significant. I'm talking about the International Women's Day, a day which has been set aside to celebrate women, to talk about their achievements, raise awareness about biases against women, to reflect on how far we have come with the agenda of women empowerment. In fact, the week's activities and especially the shows have been dedicated to promote this, to promote this. We're talking about Good Morning Africa, where we had women at the forefront of women empowerment, having insightful discussion, Wednesday Palava. But don't worry if you missed them. Today's Street Talk has also been dedicated for that purpose, women empowerment. And we are asking the question, are we making progress? Are we making progress? Because governments may put down policies and laws for this agenda, but if the people are laid back, are we making a headway or do we make a headway? And so that is what we are going to do today. The people are going to share with us what's the opinion about women empowerment, what are the biases against women, and going forward as a people,